The ambush and the unveiling of the trap. You are a cancer on this democracy. The words, sharp and venomous, sliced across the rarefied air of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearing room, forcing a sudden, involuntary flinch from the seasoned political veterans present. Congresswoman Ilhan Omar stood defiantly at the witness table, her finger leveled at Senator Ted Cruz like a precision-guided weapon. Her voice trembling with a well-rehearsed, theatrical rage. The chamber, which moments before had been filled with the low, confident hum of staffers and journalists, fell into a chilling silence so profound that the electronic buzz of the overhead lights became a distinct, unnerving sound. Omar hadn't been invited, she wasn't a senator. Yet, she had strategically infiltrated the proceedings, flanked by a phalanx of progressive activists who had secured gallery access. Intent on transforming a dull foreign policy briefing into her own personal spectacle. For too long, this committee has harbored warmongers and Islamophobes, she continued, her volume escalating with each word, playing directly to the bank of cameras. Senator Cruz represents everything wrong with American foreign policy, a man so deeply owned by the Israel lobby that he can't see Palestinian children as human beings. The gallery immediately erupted. Young activists, in their matching protest shirts, shouted a coordinated chorus of, "Shame! Shame!" while others dramatically held aloft photographs of destruction. The producers in the press pool were undoubtedly ecstatic. The anonymous tip they'd received about the unexpected confrontation had delivered a ratings goldmine. Senator Ted Cruz sat utterly motionless. His expression as unreadable as ancient carved stone. His pen moved across his legal pad in smooth, unhurried strokes, documenting Omar's character assassination as if it were nothing more than a routine, low-stakes policy briefing. The only minuscule sign of his internal state was a slight, almost imperceptible tightening around his eyes, the cool, assessing look of a master prosecutor who had just listened to a desperate witness inadvertently confirm their own doom. Senator Cruz pushes for war while taking money from defense contractors. Omar pressed, her focus locked on the cameras, not the senator. He demonizes Muslims while claiming to stand for religious freedom. He is a hypocrite, a bigot. Representative Omar, committee chairman Jim Risch interrupted, his gavel hovering uncertainly. This is highly irregular. You haven't been invited to testify. And personal attacks are not. The American people deserve to know the truth. Omar shot back, seizing the moral high ground she believed was her right. They deserve to know that their senators are bought and paid for by foreign interests. The profound, almost sickening irony of that specific accusation, coming from Ilhan Omar, was immediately recognized by many in the room. Senators Marco Rubio and Ron Johnson exchanged glances that spoke volumes about the audacity of the charge. Even some Democrats visibly squirmed, sensing their House colleague had careened recklessly into a dangerous and potentially self-destructive lane. Cruz finally looked up from his notes, his dark eyes meeting Omar's with an unnerving, patient intensity, the gaze of a chess master who had calculated the trap 7 moves ago and was now watching his opponent march willingly into checkmate. He set his pen down with a quiet, deliberate click, then leaned back in his chair. "Are you finished, Representative Omar?" His voice was calm, almost patronizingly gentle, the parent inquiring about the end of a very public tantrum. "I'm just getting started," Omar snarled, completely misreading his composure as weakness. "The people need to know about your ties too." "Good," Cruz interrupted smoothly, seizing control of the narrative and the room's atmosphere. "Because I have some questions for you as well." He reached down to his briefcase and pulled out a thick manila folder. He angled the label just enough for the C-SPAN cameras to capture it in pristine focus. Omar Files. The change in the room was immediate and palpable, a physical drop in temperature. A palpable rush of adrenaline. Reporters who'd been frantically typing froze, sensing the narrative had violently shifted. The activists in the gallery fell into stunned silence, their pre-planned chants dying in their throats. "Mr. Chairman," Cruz said, his voice now taking on the measured, compelling cadence of a man who had successfully argued before the nation's highest court. "Since Representative Omar has chosen to make this personal, perhaps we should discuss some personal matters that are actually relevant to national security." He opened the folder and pulled out a single document, holding it up briefly for the cameras to register its official appearance. Before we discuss foreign policy, Representative Omar, let's discuss your marriage to your brother. The silence that followed was more than deafening, it was an atmospheric vacuum. Omar's face, minutes ago flushed with righteous fire, drained of color instantly. She swayed slightly, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. A fish pulled violently from its element. What? She finally managed. Her voice a cracked whisper of a scream. That's a racist lie that's been debunked. The immigration and identity fraud documentation. Has it? Cruz asked, his voice remaining disarmingly mild. The quiet skepticism of a man holding an irrefutable ace. He pulled a second document from the folder. Because I have here a marriage certificate from 2009. You legally married Ahmed Noor, said Elmi. Would you like to explain to this committee who Mr. Elmi is? This is Islamophobic propaganda, Omar shrieked, but the conviction had evaporated from her voice, replaced by a raw, naked panic. Her hands gripped the edges of the witness table, the knuckles whitening under the pressure. It's a simple question, Cruz continued, his tone remaining conversationally calm, utterly indifferent to her frantic deflection. Who is Ahmed Noor, said Elmi. Is he or is he not your brother? The gallery was a frozen tableau of shock. The same activists who minutes ago were roaring, shame, now stared in stunned silence. Their belief system buckling under the weight of the unimaginable allegation. Media producers were frantically texting. A desperate internal scramble to determine how to cover this explosive, potentially career-ending development. I don't have to answer these racist attacks. Omar weakly protested, her eyes darting toward the exits. 2 Capitol police officers, present for protocol, remained at the doors, their presence suddenly transforming from routine security to ominous sentinels. You don't have to answer. Cruz readily agreed, allowing the concession only to make the next statement more devastating. But the American people deserve to know if a sitting member of Congress committed immigration fraud. They deserve to know if you married your brother to circumvent U.S. immigration law. These are lies, Omar screamed, her control slipping entirely. Debunked lies spread by right-wing blogs. Then it should be easy to disprove. Cruz responded, the voice of reason against hysteria. He pulled out another piece of evidence, a social media post from 2013 where Mr. Elmi referred to Omar's daughter as his niece. What context makes your husband calling your daughter his niece appropriate? Cruz asked, letting the logic crush her defense. Unless, of course, she actually is his niece, because he's your brother. The political calculus in the room was visibly changing by the second. Several Democratic senators were now huddled, whispering urgently among themselves. Senator Bob Menendez, a man no stranger to the scorching scrutiny of scandal, was demonstrably shifting his chair away from the escalating crisis. What began as Omar's calculated ambush was rapidly morphing into her high-profile political execution. That's taken out of context. She stammered, frantically scrambling for a foothold. Mr. Chairman, Omar desperately appealed, this is a McCarthy-style witch hunt. These baseless accusations. Then provide the proof they're baseless. Cruz interrupted, seizing the rhetorical advantage. Show us Mr. Elmi's birth certificate. Show us his parents' names. Prove he's not your brother. Should be simple, right? Omar's desperate move was to attempt a physical escape, grabbing her papers and turning away from the witness table. But as she pivoted, Cruz's voice, now laced with steel, stopped her cold. We're not done, Representative Omar. We haven't even discussed the tax fraud yet. She froze mid-step, her back rigid with tension. Slowly, like a person forced to witness their own death, she turned back to face him. What tax fraud? She whispered, the tremor in her voice suggesting she knew the answer all too well. The tax fraud bombshell. The question of, what tax fraud, was rhetorical. The fear in Omar's eyes was already an admission. Cruz, having cornered his prey, now began the methodical, clinical exposure of her financial deception. He pulled out another set of documents, carefully laying them out on the desk like cards in a rigged game. These are tax returns from 2014 and 2015. You filed jointly with Ahmed Hirsi. The documents, displayed for the cameras, were damning. Just one problem, Cruz continued, his voice taking on the sharp, Unforgiving edge of prosecutorial steel. You were legally married to Mr. Elmi at the time. Care to explain how you were filing joint tax returns with one man while legally married to another? The blood had completely drained from Omar's face. She looked on the verge of fainting. An aide rushed forward with a glass of water, but she violently waved him off. A gesture of panicked denial. The fundamental, unassailable fact remained. A person cannot legally file a joint tax return with someone they are not legally married to. This was not just an ethical lapse, it was a federal crime. But we're just getting started. Cruz continued, warming to the theme of systemic deception. Let's talk about what else you've been hiding from the American people. He looked toward the chairman. Mr. Chairman, I believe we need to adjust today's agenda. We have much to discuss with Representative Omar. Chairman Risch, who had been watching the methodical destruction with the horrified fascination of a man witnessing a slow-motion train wreck, slowly nodded his assent. Yes, Senator Cruz, please proceed. Representative Omar, please remain seated. This committee has questions. As Omar shakily returned to the witness table, her legs barely able to support her weight, Cruz organized his papers with the terrifying precision of a surgeon preparing for a complex, essential procedure. The folder before him was thick, an arsenal of further documents. The hunter had become the hunted, and the most devastating blows were still to come. Omar's desperate attempt at defense finally emerged. We were separated. Culturally divorced. She stammered into the microphone. Culturally divorced? Cruz repeated, his voice dripping with skepticism, giving the ridiculous phrase the weight of official scorn. Is that a legal term? Because the IRS doesn't recognize cultural divorce. They recognize legal marriage. And legally, you were married to Mr. Elmi while filing taxes with Mr. Hersey. He produced another set of documents, revealing a calculated layer of financial gain. But it gets worse. These are education records showing that Mr. Elmi attended North Dakota State University. Guess who listed him as a spouse for financial aid purposes? And guess who was receiving tax benefits for education expenses for a spouse who was actually your brother? The hearing room descended into chaos. Reporters were openly talking on their phones, broadcasting the live revelations. Omar's progressive supporters, shell-shocked by the unspooling corruption, were quietly heading for the exits, abandoning their champion. In a desperate, final flailing, Omar screamed in accusation, its political resonance immediate and profound. This is a lynching. A high-tech lynching of a black Muslim woman. The controversial, politically charged comparison drew sharp intakes of breath. An ultimate deflection designed to shut down the oversight entirely. Cruz's response was measured, devastating, and entirely factual. Representative Omar, examining potential criminal conduct isn't a lynching. It's oversight. It's the law. The same law that applies to everyone, regardless of race, religion, or political party. He gestured to the pile of evidence. You have every opportunity to refute this evidence. Show us Mr. Elmi's birth certificate. Show us the legal divorce from Mr. Elmi before you filed taxes with Mr. Hersey. Can you do any of that? Omar's subsequent silence was the answer. I thought not, Cruz said, but we're not done. We haven't even gotten to your campaign finance violations yet. Mr. Chairman, I suggest we take a 5-minute recess. He paused, delivering the final, tactical blow. I believe Representative Omar might need a moment to consult with counsel about whether she wants to continue testifying or invoke her Fifth Amendment rights. The unmasking of campaign finance corruption, the affair and the payments. The gavel cracked, signaling the 5-minute recess. But the ensuing chaos and emergency meetings throughout the Capitol suggested a permanent adjournment would have been preferable. Democratic leadership, we later learned, huddled in crisis mode, with whispers of damage control and cut her loose echoing in the hallways. When the hearing was finally called back to order, the atmosphere was palpably changed. Several Democratic senators had failed to return. Their empty chairs an eloquent testament to rapidly recalculated political risk. Omar returned to the witness table looking utterly haggard, her composure shattered. Her face betraying hastily wiped tears. Cruz waited until a complete, heavy silence had descended, his expression now holding a strange, almost pitying look. The hunter who finds no joy in the kill but recognizes the absolute necessity of the act. Representative Omar, he began, his voice softer than before, giving her one final, merciful chance. Would you like to invoke your Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination before we continue? Her lawyer leaned in urgently. But Omar pushed him away with a startling burst of defiant energy. I've done nothing wrong, she said, her voice thin and devoid of all conviction. Very well, Cruz interrupted, moving past the hollow denial. Let's discuss your campaign finances. Specifically your payments to the E Street Group. He pulled out a large spreadsheet. Between 2018 and 2020, your campaign paid over $800 to the E Street Group, a consulting firm owned by Tim Minette. Are you familiar with Mr. Minette? Omar's hands clenched into fists on the table. He was a consultant. Many campaigns use consultants. Indeed, they do. Cruz agreed with devastating politeness. But how many campaigns pay consultants they're having affairs with? The blunt, shocking question sent a fresh wave of shock through the gallery. Omar's face flushed a deep, volcanic red. That's a disgusting accusation. Is it? Cruz countered, pulling out a court document. This is from Mr. Minette's divorce filing. His wife, Beth Minette, stated under oath that her husband was having an affair with you. She said he admitted it to her in April 2019. He then produced a graph, visually connecting the personal betrayal to the financial corruption. Coincidentally, that's when your payments to his firm dramatically increased. Prior to April 2019, you paid his firm modest amounts. After April, we see payments of $50, $75, even a $100 at a time. Your affair began, and suddenly his firm became exponentially more valuable. Correlation isn't causation, Omar protested weakly, clinging to the only legalistic defense she had left. True, Cruz conceded, which is why we look at the services provided. Can you tell this committee what specific services the E Street Group provided for $800? What deliverables did you receive? Omar was frozen, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Her lawyer was frantically texting, no longer attempting to advise her verbally. Let me help, Cruz offered with mock kindness. According to FEC filings, the payments were for travel expenses, consulting, and digital services, very vague. But here's what's interesting. We subpoenaed travel records. He pulled out a new stack of documents, revealing the final layer of corruption. These show you and Mr. Minette traveling together repeatedly to places that had nothing to do with campaign events. A romantic getaway to Puerto Rico, billed as constituent services. A trip to Seattle during which no campaign events occurred. Shall I continue? They don't require sharing hotel rooms with your consultant. Yes, we have those receipts too. The press section exploded. This was no longer just about fraud. It was about corruption so brazen it defied belief. The systemic pattern and criminal intent. But it gets worse, Cruz continued, his tone a mix of weary disgust and prosecutorial zeal. Because using campaign funds for personal travel with your lover is bad enough. But you also paid his firm during your government-funded trips, double-dipping. Representative Omar, charging taxpayers for travel while your campaign paid your boyfriend's company for the exact same trips. He produced another damning document. This is a report from the Office of Congressional Ethics. They found substantial reason to believe you violated campaign finance laws. Their words, not mine. Yet somehow the House Ethics Committee, controlled by your party, decided not to pursue it. Funny how that works. The subtle, final indictment of the Democratic leadership was laid bare. The Republican senators were now fully engaged, sensing the total political collapse of their opponent. Senator Josh Hawley was particularly focused, his interest driven by the sheer brazenness of the self-enrichment. Let's talk about what else your campaign funds bought. Cruz pressed on. He laid out a paper trail of corruption that was almost breathtaking in its audacity. Payments to your husband's wine club. Payments to a limousine company for your daughter's prom. Payments to Amazon that coincidentally match your personal shopping history. With each revelation, he placed another document on the growing, overwhelming pile. I made mistakes, Omar finally admitted, her voice a barely audible whisper. Her defiance utterly broken. Some expenses were incorrectly. Mistakes? Cruz's voice hardened into an iron fist. Was it a mistake when you paid your new husband? Sorry. Mr. Minette is your current husband. Correct? His company another $2.7 million through your campaign and allied PACs? That's not a mistake, Representative Omar. That's a pattern. That's corruption. He pulled out the final document from this section. The one that elevated the charges from financial mismanagement to active, intentional criminality. This is from a former employee of your campaign. They state that they were instructed to falsify receipts, to create fake invoices, to backdate documents. They say you personally directed this fraud. They're prepared to testify before a grand jury. Are they lying, too? Omar had gone completely silent, staring at the table as if waiting for the earth to open up and swallow her whole. Her lawyer was now frantically attempting to contact criminal defense counsel. But let's put the campaign finance crimes aside for a moment, Cruz said, his tone suggesting they were nowhere near done. Let's talk about where some of this money went. Specifically, let's talk about your connections to organizations with, shall we say, interesting affiliations. Omar's head snapped up, fresh fear flashing in her eyes. She knew what was coming next, the final, most serious chapter, and the knowledge seemed to age her by years in an instant. No, she whispered, a desperate plea. Oh, yes, Cruz said softly, leaning into the microphone. Let's talk about who you've been funding and who's been funding you. Because that's where this gets really interesting. And by interesting, I mean potentially treasonous. The word treasonous ripped through the room. A final, chilling shock wave that elevated the entire confrontation from a matter of personal corruption to one of national security. The devastating execution continued. The anti-Semitism record and the treasonous implication. The weight of the word treasonous hung in the air, transforming the committee room into a place of profound dread. Cruz, a master of pacing, let the implication linger, allowing the sheer magnitude of the final accusation to break down any remaining resistance. Before we discuss your financial connections, he began, pulling out a thick folder labeled Public Statements. Let's examine your own words, Representative Omar. Words that have caused pain to millions of Americans and raised serious questions about your fitness to serve in Congress. Omar's jaw clenched. This was her familiar ground. She had spent years debating her controversial statements, always managing to deflect criticism as merely anti-war sentiment, Islamophobia, or racism. But Cruz's methodical approach suggested this time the defense would fail. February 11, 2019, Cruz read from a document. You tweeted, "It's all about the Benjamins, baby," in reference to American support for Israel. When asked to clarify who you thought was paying American politicians, you responded, "IPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee." I apologized for that, Omar quickly interjected, attempting to contain the damage. You acknowledged it after massive bipartisan backlash, Cruz corrected, his voice sharp with historical context. After your own party leadership condemned you. But let's look at the pattern, shall we? This wasn't an isolated incident. He pulled out a timeline that stretched across several pages, laying bare a systemic history of rhetoric. 2012, before you were in Congress, Israel has hypnotized the world. May Allah awaken the people and help them see the evil doings of Israel. You were 30 years old, Representative Omar, old enough to know exactly what ancient anti-Semitic trope you were invoking. I was speaking about policy. Were you? Cruz interrupted, his voice edged with controlled fury. Because Jews being accused of hypnotizing or controlling the world is literally one of the oldest anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. It's in the protocols of the Elders of Zion. It was used by the Nazis. But you knew that, didn't you? He produced another document. March 2019. At a bookstore event, you said, I want to talk about the political influence in this country that says it is okay to push for allegiance to a foreign country. Another classic anti-Semitic trope, dual loyalty. The idea that Jewish Americans are more loyal to Israel than America. I was talking about all foreign influence. Omar protested, her voice hollow and unconvincing. Were you? Cruz repeated. He let the question hang, allowing the documented history of her statements to speak for itself. The point was made. Omar's history of statements was not accidental political phrasing, but a pattern of invoking tropes directly linked to hate and historical persecution. The context of these comments, juxtaposed with the evidence of her extensive financial corruption and alleged willingness to violate immigration and tax law for personal gain, created the terrifying political nexus. Cruz was setting the stage to argue that her rhetoric was not just hateful, but potentially funded by hostile interests. The treasonous implication was now fully contextualized, ready for the final, devastating reveal of her foreign financial ties. The destruction of her ethical image was complete. The destruction of her patriotism was next. Conclusion: the Fifth Amendment ultimatum. The atmosphere in the room had become unbearable. The weight of the collective evidence, immigration fraud, tax fraud, campaign finance fraud, and a documented pattern of anti-Semitic rhetoric, pressing down on Omar like a physical force. Cruz, having methodically laid out the totality of her alleged crimes, moved in for the ultimate political checkmate. He gestured to the massive, undeniable pile of documents covering the witness table, a paper mountain built entirely from her own documented actions and words. Representative Omar, examining potential criminal conduct isn't a lynching. It's oversight. It's the law. The same law that applies to everyone, regardless of race, religion, or political party. He reiterated the demand, forcing her to choose between two political impossibilities. You have every opportunity to refute this evidence. Show us Mr. Elmi's birth certificate proving he's not your brother. Show us immigration records proving he didn't use your marriage for entry. Show us the legal divorce from Mr. Elmi before you filed taxes with Mr. Hersey. Can you do any of that? Omar's silence was the only answer she could give. I thought not, Cruz said, the simple phrase delivering the final verdict. But we're not done. He looked toward the chairman. We haven't even gotten to your campaign finance violations yet. Mr. Chairman, I suggest we take a 5-minute recess. Then came the final, tactical blow that acknowledged the grave criminal threat hanging over her head. I believe Representative Omar might need a moment to consult with counsel about whether she wants to continue testifying or invoke her Fifth Amendment rights. The gavel came down with a crack that signaled the end of the political hearing and the beginning of a potential criminal investigation. Omar had attempted to shut down scrutiny with an outburst of theatrical victimhood. But Cruz had relentlessly brought the conversation back to the cold, undeniable truth of official documents. As the room erupted into motion, Omar remained frozen at the witness table. The high-tech, live-streamed spectacle of her political execution complete. Her image as the authentic, anti-establishment progressive champion had crumbled in real time. When she finally moved, it was with the slow, uncertain steps of a woman twice her age. Her lawyer practically supporting her weight as they moved toward a side room for an emergency consultation. Behind them, Ted Cruz remained calm, already organizing his papers for the final, unaired chapter. The brothers scandal and the tax fraud were the appetizers. The campaign finance violations were the main course. The specter of the final, potentially treasonous, financial ties awaited the next round. But for now, the message was absolute. The aftermath and political reckoning. The political violence unleashed in that Senate hearing room transcended a simple partisan confrontation. It was a brutal, clinical demonstration of what happens when performative identity politics collides head-on with forensic fact-finding. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's earlier destruction by Cruz was a lesson. Ilhan Omar's was a systemic dismantling. The immediate aftermath was defined by systemic political cowardice. The extended recess and the empty chairs of several Democratic senators upon the hearing's resumption spoke volumes. The party that championed her as an untouchable symbol of diversity, a figure whose mere criticism was often labeled racism or Islamophobia, had silently cut her loose. The frantic huddle outside the hearing room, where Nancy Pelosi's name was reportedly mentioned repeatedly along with phrases like damage control and cut her loose, confirmed the political calculation. She was a liability to be jettisoned. This was the ultimate exposure of the two-tiered justice system that Omar and her allies decried. Only here, the system was protecting the powerful political actor for narrative utility, until her crimes became too documented, too blatant, to ignore. The image of Omar, returning to the witness table haggard, her makeup smudged, after being offered the escape hatch of the Fifth Amendment, will forever be the symbol of her collapse. She had walked in a righteous prosecutor and left a cornered defendant. The fundamental error of her political life, and the error of the system that protected her, was exposed by three undeniable facts. immigration fraud, the brother marriage, tax fraud, the double filing, and campaign finance fraud, the $2.7 million paid to her lover's firm. Ted Cruz's final, powerful message was that the days of Republicans rolling over are done. He didn't cower when called names. He punched back twice as hard with evidence. He demonstrated the fundamental weakness of identity politics when stripped of its protected categories. All that remained was the truth about someone's actions. The calculated silence of the media on the initial fraud and the political protection she received were themselves indictments of a system that privileged narrative over law. The political execution of Ilhan Omar was complete. It was a victory not just for a conservative senator, but for the principle of accountability over identity. Omar's carefully constructed image as the authentic, incorruptible progressive was reduced to a paper pile of receipts, false affidavits, and a desperate, discredited cry of lynching. As Cruz calmly organized his papers for the final, unaired round, the potentially treasonous foreign financial ties, the ghost of a smile playing at his mouth confirmed the terrifying reality. The self-proclaimed revolutionary had been exposed as the very corruption she had sworn to fight. And the final bill had come due.